Off the usual, so look semi-professional, but welcome back to the live edition of the Wellbeing Show. I've forgotten what it was called then. I've been away for so long that I've forgotten all about it. Who am I? I'm Noel Mcdermott. I'm your host for this evening. I've got a great guest in Garry Mansell, who's joining this evening with a long history of amazing work that he's done, sort of for companies, global companies, actually. So we'll learn about Garry in a minute. Just before that, I'm going to warn you that I've got a cold, folks, so I might hack away. But it seems okay to continue given that it's online, so I'm not sort of passing my germs on to anybody in these post-COVID days. We're all very conscious of those things, aren't we? I thought it might be a bit overkill if I put a mask on as well, given that it's a Zoom meeting. We can forgo that one. Got a great show for you tonight. Be great if you joined in. Give us a call if you like. 07506 319 745. That's +44 if it's outside the UK. Drop us a line on WhatsApp or give us a call. And if you want to have a chat with Garry, there's no way you want to have a chat with me because I'm just really boring. So just forget that. But Gary's got some interesting things to discuss about from his position as a senior leader in the industries that he's worked in. Without any further ado, I'm just going to jump in and say hello, Garry. Welcome from the wilds of Norfolk. I think that's
hi. Thank you. It's really good to be here. It's great to be able to do this show with you.
I'm really cool. I saw you presenting at a conference. I think a month ago it was sort of back to real world conference on issues around employment, and I sort of really enjoyed your discussion about masks, the masks that we wear and the lack of authenticity, particularly sort of leadership. So tell us a little bit about you, Garry. You've been around the block a little bit, I think, haven't you?
That's putting it very mildly. Absolutely. I mean, I ended up running a couple of businesses and selling the last one a few years back now. And since then, I've been working as a non-executive director and written a book, and I do a bunch of work as a board advisor, and then public speaking as well, which is the thing I really, really enjoy. It's great to be up in front of an audience. And I did one for an MSc course at the University of East Anglia on Friday with their entrepreneurial segment. And it was meant to last for an hour and it lasted for 2. And it was good fun to do. And they weren't quite throwing me off the stage at the end, but I was proud of myself because it was a Friday and it started at 3. So, I actually kept the audience there, which
that is impressive, actually.
Yeah, I made them shut all the bars in Norwich and all the bars in the college and everything. But no, rolling
locked to the doors and chained the handles together. And
exactly. You could hear them slamming.
That's right. But you claimed it as success anyway. Your own little computing going on. And
I work on a really simple principle. Yeah, even if it's not a success, celebrate it like it was one.
That's right. I think Peter would like you a lot. You could just pop over and sort of teach him.
Thanks. I was there for a while, as you know. I did work in Russia for a while.
Yes, you did.
Not in those areas.
But
winding back. I'm actually a graduate chemist. So absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with running businesses. I did chemistry because I just kind of liked it. And then it was kind of get a degree and then see what you want to do, really. I guess the majority of my career was with Mars Incorporated. So I worked with them in various areas. I did some work. I came, first of all, into their R&D division, but then rapidly moved into systems, not programming, but a systems analyst, as it was in those days, back in the 80s. The guys who actually said, how does this work? Now let's try and make it work on a computer. That job disappeared like so many others. I ended up basically being a buyer for Mars. So basically in procurement, and they're world renowned really for their procurement expertise. I bought everything from, flexible packaging through to company cars, through to company travel, which is always the nightmare because you can always get that wrong because everybody's got an opinion. Raw materials, packaging, labels, all sorts of stuff, and worked in most of their offices around the world, which is brilliant.
And that's quite high pressure for people who don't understand that stuff is quite high pressure because there's a lot of money involved in that stuff. The deals that you have to sort of make, and also there's a lot of logistics and supply chain issues, aren't there? If you don't purchase on time and all that.
That's right. That's where I ended up, actually. I was looking after the procurement of all of the logistics services for Mars in Europe.
Yeah.
And then all the ocean freight around the world as well. So it was spending, not me personally, but the team working with me. We were spending 500 million euros a year.
Yeah.
And of course, it is about keeping the factories running and keeping the goods in the stores that people come and buy.
Yeah.
And one of the disadvantages of living in Norfolk, by the way, you may have heard above, is RAF Marham is 2 miles away from me.
Imagine they're busy at the moment, to be honest.
You could
as you carry on,
they're
busy. It makes me feel better, to be honest.
There's quite a lot of traffic during the day and in the
sure there is, to be honest. Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, so basically, I mean, I was looking after logistics for them in Europe, and then in 1999.
It's interesting, but it's logistics is a word that has taken on a meaning currently because we're seeing the impact of appalling logistics in Ukraine. I mean, I don't want to keep it, but it's the truth, isn't it? The Russians are failing because their logistics are dreadful, and they always have been dreadful. Napoleon said it. I think it was Napoleon that argued that armies run on their bellies.
Very much so. Yeah. I mean, but basically, if you don't give troops hot food, you can't get fuel and you can't get ammunition. You're going to lose.
Yeah, but it's simple as that. Or of any sort of large organisation such as Mars or anything like that that's international, sort of being able to move stuff around in a timely fashion, but also not have things just stuck in a warehouse rotting away, particularly with consumables like the type of stuff that Mars is involved in.
Yeah, I mean, at one stage, I was looking after logistics of a chilled food chain for them, where the shelf life of white sauces that we put into supermarkets was 4 days.
Yeah.
So it was make today for delivery tonight. Yeah. And that was all over the UK in that case. And then we started shipping them out across the whole of Europe as well. So logistics is a really fun thing to work in because it's both strategic and operational. So you get both things.
Yeah, but also at the sort of level that you're working at as well, sort of very, very high pressure. And I'm sort of, again, I'm making that point because I know some of the issues that we're going to be bringing up later on in terms of, ethical and authentic leadership. And I think it's easy for somebody who's not been under the cosh, as it were, to have that conversation, but to hear it from somebody who has been under the cosh in a billion-dollar industry.
Yeah.
There's an authority to that, and that's why I'm sort of labouring that point, because I do want people to understand that you had significant responsibility on your shoulders. So when you talk about these issues, you're talking as somebody who had to walk that walk under very difficult circumstances at times, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, a classic example is when we went in to do business in Russia just after Boris Yeltsin was there.
With all that nonsense going on, exactly. I mean, how did you...
And literally, we had supply chains that were making Snickers bars in the USA and bringing them into Moscow.
Yeah.
And basically it was... We had to reinvent everything we were doing because the infrastructure wasn't there. But it's huge fun to do, and it's incredibly rewarding. And then, as you say, if you lead it right and you get the right team and you give them the tools and the authority and let them go, boy, do they work.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the kind of carrying on the career saga. In 1999, as I say, I was looking after the purchasing and procurement of all of the logistics services for Mars in Europe. with a team of people working for me, and we developed some very clever buying software that was allowing us to go out to the marketplace and tender all of our flows across the world. And it's actually quite a small world. You know, I got to know all of my opposite numbers in the other big companies like P&G and Unilever and Cadbury's and all the people who supplied to the same people as us, and some who didn't. And they all used to turn around and were really fascinated with what we were doing. And they were saying things like, well, could we use your software? And of course, I was saying, absolutely not. It's a competitive advantage. Go away. But if enough people tell you that enough times, even the dumbest of us, me included, kind of go, hang on, this is saleable. This is a different business.
Yeah.
This isn't just making Mars bars and making pedigree pet food and things like that. This is, we can sell this software and we can sell this service. And at the time, Mars were really, I mean, they are an incredibly good company, and they were looking for new business opportunities. So I proposed to them the idea of doing what we did, but for other people, as well as Mars. And it was very well received. And I became what is known now as an entrepreneur. I kind of created this business called Freight Traders inside Mars. Yeah. And basically we started to help people buy their freight services across Europe. And parts of it went extremely well, and parts of it there were problems. And again, we were inventing something which wasn't there. I mean, this was 1999. The internet was only just being used. I mean, I'm one of those things they call an internet pioneer. Yeah. There aren't many.
It's known as a pterodactyl. Sort of.
I think you're absolutely right. Yeah. Yes. You know, I mean, I talk to some of the guys I work with now, and I was talking about, I was giving an example of leadership and talking about Gene Kranz and Apollo 13 as, you know, the mission commander. And I asked an audience of 100 people, how many of you have seen the film Apollo 13? And not one of them had. So I thought, oh, new slide, throw that one away then.
I'm one of those who remembers a ZX Spectrum. I'm sure you do as well.
I think I've still got one in the loft.
Yeah, and sort of that noise which defines a generation, that which young people don't know.
The modem connection. Yeah,
absolutely. You've got no idea what it is with broadband these days, but that's how it is. So I get it. So you were, I mean, not only just producing these incredible software packages which were allowing other companies to grow, but actually, I mean, selling that idea to your bosses as well, because like you say, it would have been seen as, well, this is our competitive advantage. Why on earth would we be moving out and selling?
And truthfully, I was actually about to leave Mars and go and do it in my own right. I had some of the funding already, and I had a name called Freight Traders. You know, does what it says on the can. And wanted to go and leave. And actually, they really just turned around to me and said, well, why don't you stay? But there are some conditions. We won't let you own this business, but you can write your own contract. As long as you write it so that it's very driven towards results. And it should be. You know, basically, they were being the business angel to me, quite frankly. No guarantees of business, but they were being a business angel. And I was able to pick my own board. And they also asked me at the time, they said, well, you know, we will actually support you, but you can pick any people inside the business to come and join this new business. But the criteria is they must want to. Yeah. We will never impose that on anybody. Yeah. So you've got to sell it to them. Yeah. And they've got to do the same kind of things as you. And there are no guarantees that if this fails, that you're coming back into the main Mars business. Yeah. But there were some big rewards. So it was something of a negotiation, and I'm eternally grateful to Mars for letting me do that. And we did.
It's really, I find it really interesting that a large company can think in those terms, because when trying to support important people within your organization, which you would have been, but also support the growth and development. I mean, I'm always, when I'm doing consultancy, saying, well, you know, if somebody wants to go, you don't want to hold on to them. You want to support them in a good way, because you don't want somebody resentful. But Mars had a very interesting way of letting you go and keeping you at the same time, which is very clever.
Absolutely. I thought was, I mean, I think about it now and I realise how smart they were.
Yeah.
And you know, I've had a conversation with you before where I said, well, I actually took the principles of Mars and put them into the next business, which was outside of Mars.
Yeah.
Because that's what happened. We got to 2006 and without trying to get too technical about it, there was a piece of our software that was missing.
Yeah.
It was the decision piece of our software, the really, really clever piece. And nobody had it. It was still in the maths laboratories in the universities of the world. And we found a little tiny company up in Sweden, in Uppsala University, which for the people who don't know is like the Swedish MIT. And they had a piece of software that allowed decision making to be made, mathematical decision making using game theory and really clever algorithms. And it had been used on a number of things in Sweden already, but in a very research kind of field. You know, like they'd used it for doing all of their ferry tendering, for their, you know, all the ferries that, and I think they used it also for their 4G auctions.
Right.
And they let the guys in the university run it. So I basically went there, loved it, spoke to the guys and said, I want to integrate this into freight traders. And that's exactly what we did. And I had one of the really salient lessons in my life of the difference between a corporate company and a real startup or a university startup. I turned around to the guy who was the head of maths and computing at the university, who had this company with 2 or 3 others, and said, well, how long would it take you to integrate the product into mine? Thinking he'd tell me something like 5 months. And he said 5 days.
Yes, exactly. That's right.
And I turned around to him and said, well, you clearly don't understand what's going on. And he just looked me in the eyes and said, Garry, I'm the chair professor of maths and computing in Uppsala University. I can do it in 5 days. He couldn't negotiate with me in terms of how much it was going to cost me.
Yes, exactly. They're amazing, those people, aren't they? So brilliant. There's a sort of a modern equivalent, and there's sort of, you know, one that, like, if we think about the vaccines that were produced, particularly in the UK, the Cambridge vaccine, because it's a very similar process that, you know, that they were already working on something else and using it for sort of to cure malaria, and then they just vectored it to this current pandemic, and they did it in no time at all. And extraordinary.
And that's the things that can happen. And what was happening is computer power was getting so much more affordable at the time, and things you couldn't do 5 years before then, they could now do. And it was a case of I mean, it is about saying, well, what I've got now isn't good enough. What's out there? What can I get that will improve things, that will make me more valuable, make the product more valuable? What is it the customer wants? But anyway, I came back to Mars and basically said, well, you know, we really need to buy this company, because if we don't, somebody else will, and they have the power to put me out of business. They're not there now by a long way, but, you know, the two together would be really, really good. And at the time, Freight Traders as a company, I mean, it wasn't producing the massive scale that we thought it might do back in 1999. And I had a very, very adult conversation with Mars, and they basically said, well, no, we really don't want to do that, but, you know, we're happy with what's been going on, but, you know, something, it isn't quite fitting with us. And as I said to you before, the details of the deal I can't talk about because it's still under a non-disclosure agreement. But what actually happened is myself and my team, a large proportion of my team, left Mars with money and went and moved and became Trade Extensions, this Swedish company. So we formed an Anglo-Swedish company, and then we took it on from turning over very, very little, you know, less than £500,000, up to a turnover of 7 million and just above. It was profitable, cash rich, and it took us 10 years to do it. But I led the company, and what I did is I took the guys from Mars, who were what I considered to be the commercial people, and we married them with the technical guys, the programmers, the wire stranglers, the nerdy geeks, the guys who really do come in shorts and sandals in Sweden in November, and do play guitar and things like that. And if we have time later on, I'll tell you the story of the first meeting where I brought the two companies together, because it is mind-blowingly good.
Yeah. I can imagine. Yeah.
It's incredible. But yeah, basically we put a company together which wasn't just buying freight; it was the world's best procurement software. Truly was, and still is. And we then built that up to the point in 2016 where we sold it to one of the American software businesses, one of the American software unicorns, a company called Cooper. And everybody from Trade Extensions moved into Cooper. I stuck around for about 18 months. And truthfully, when your company gets bought, a lot of the sales never go through. But it's a really exciting time. And of course, you're going to get, the payoff you've been looking for, to put it very crudely. And we made sure that pretty much everybody inside Trade Extensions benefited from it as well, not just in terms of a job, but in terms of solid hard cash, because those guys guys and girls have been the people who made it what it was. They were going into a bigger corporation with a lot of the benefits that a big corporation will once again give them. And I knew they were good. I mean, they are really good. And pretty much every single one of them accelerated up through Cooper very, very quickly and got more and more promotions, and people were recognized as being great. But a CEO of a business you bought, they're there basically to do the integration. They're there to bring the people together and to make sure the software is integrated. And after that, to be quite honest, it's a bit like watching Alex Ferguson at Manchester United. It's like the kind of the ogre sitting up in the stands, looking down at the other managers and thinking, you're not as good as me. I never felt that. But I think there comes a time where it's important for the CEO, the person who's kind of been their dad, to get out of the way, and not be there for people to turn around and say, is it right that they can do this? Is it right? Don't you think they should be doing it this way?
Yes, exactly.
It doesn't belong to me anymore. I'm not in charge of setting the vision. I've actually done the piece I needed to do. And so that was when I left. So after 18 months, I left Cooper in very good terms. I'm still very friendly with all the guys there. And that's when I started doing the other things I talked about earlier on.
Yeah. And what's interesting in all of this for me, as a sort of coming from this psychological perspective, is the way you've presented it, and I'm sure this is the truth, is that at each point there were adult relationships and an understanding of the actual reality of the dynamics and what needed to happen. And there weren't any sort of power games or stupid mind games going on. There were people sort of wanted success in the broadest sense and knew how to achieve that.
I think the trick is when you lead something, or whether you lead an organization or a group or anything, you have to leave your ego somewhere else.
Yes.
We all have an ego, but you've got to think of the bigger prize. And everybody, I think actually, even the people who want to be childlike and have those adult-child relationships with you, most of the time you can bring them into an adult relationship by just being consistent, by keeping on having the same kind of behavior. And you actually teach them the way things can be much better once they stop being the child and they become the adult. And I never wanted a parent-child relationship in those terms with anybody who worked for me, because I think that's awful.
Yeah. Well, and also I think my experience, I don't think this is mirrored in yours, is that if you maintain the requirement that we're in adult relationships, those people that won't go into that will move on.
Yes.
Naturally, without too much drama, to be honest.
Yeah, it wouldn't be right to say that I didn't lose people, because I did, and there were some people I wanted to lose.
Yeah.
But I always think it's also important to shut the door quietly. I mean, I see that with some entrepreneurial companies or companies that I invest in now, because that's something else I do. They kind of get to 2 years or 2 million turnover, and you can tell at that point whether they're going to be successful or not, whether they're going to kick on to the next stage. Because very often the founder or the group of founders are the people getting in the way, because they've employed other people to get themselves to 2 million, and then they don't let them do the jobs they've employed.
What's known as founder syndrome, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's sort of, I've come across that so many times, and I'm a founder and I'm aware of those things, and my business is slightly different. in that there's no plan on my part to get to those types of sizes, because I sort of quite enjoy the dabbling that I do, and I like that aspect of it. And also, I mean, sort of as a personal thing in terms of mental health services, I don't want it to grow to the point where it's about spreadsheets. It's sort of like I'm not that interested in owning a hospital and stuff. I actually know people who do own several hospitals, and they're really nice people, and they really enjoy it. But it's not something I enjoy, so I have no interest.
I need their names. I'm invested in a company that does electronic medical records. I'll have to hook them up with you.
Yeah, definitely. I'll sort of link you into them. I'm sure one I'm thinking of is a good friend, actually. Sort of, he's just bought yet another hospital, and off he goes. And
isn't this a classic example? You never know what you're going to get when you start talking to people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's where the networks and the investments come in. But it's very true. I mean, you do find people who really either can't let their business go or don't recognise that they're being the boundary, or they're being the barrier to their business growing.
Yeah, I mean,
I always say to them, you need to stop.
Yeah, I mean, a good example in my life of my professional life, a destructive sort of element of that. I remember I used to work for a charity called Kids Company, and it was run by a very colourful person who was undoubtedly brilliant at what they did, but in the end, they were the reason why it went under, because they just could not do this, letting it go, because any organisation that grows, you need to put in people to allow that growth, because you can't, as you say, if it's centred on your own ego and etc., then it's limited by that. And again, looking on the world stage, we're seeing that in terms of the disaster that's happening in Ukraine. There's a very dysfunctional ego that is creating that problem. That's
exactly right.
Writ large example of it, and quite an extreme example of it, but it's the reality of what's going on.
I mean, it's one of my old bosses turned around to me and said, the thing about leadership is very simple.
Yeah.
He said, basically, there go my troops, so I'm going to follow them.
Yeah.
And when you think about that just as a simple phrase.
Yeah.
And if you set the vision, and they've got the tools they need to do, and you can keep the crap off them, because I always saw that as being, that was really the most valuable thing I ever did, was keeping the crap off people, so they get on and do the things that were which were useful, and then you just followed them and you made sure they were okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the clinicians that work for me have worked in other environments where they've been micromanaged, and I just don't see that. You need to, I believe that you find the people who know what they're doing, you let them do it, and then you do your bit about making sure that it happens in an appropriate, safe, sort of well-directed context. And so I have meetings with my clinicians, which are very much about, okay, well, that's what you've done. This is the direction and the vision we need in this particular case, in this particular situation. How are you contributing to that? But I don't get involved in trying to tell them how to do their job. It's just a disaster, really, I think, if you do that.
Yeah, the last computer I programmed was in Fortran. Come on. I know where the buttons are, and I can as long as the interface is pretty intuitive, I'm pretty good with them. But I had some fabulous people working for me who were the fastest and most accurate coders I've ever worked with in my life. And all you had to do was leave them alone.
Yes. No, I totally
recognise the fact that you might lose them for 2 hours.
I've been, because I do this sort of organisational consultancy at times. I mean, I'm not much of an organisational consultant. I get annoyed with it, if the truth. Don't employ me to do that, folks, because I'll just get irritated with you. But
I'm just going to upset you.
Yeah, you can see why organisations are toxic, and it's because of this interference. It's because of this lack of trust. It's because of this desire to control and dominate, which I think might neatly bring us back to some of the more values-based philosophical conversation that I'm interested in having with you. I wanted people to hear your experience, because it's, it's serious business experience that you've had where there's been a lot of pressure and a lot of things in terms of people's livelihoods, in terms of millions and billions worth of products that could go wrong and stuff like that. So it's been a significant, serious sort of experience that you've had at a very senior level. And yet, when I talk to you, when I listen to you at the conference, you have some very simple and straightforward messages about the ethics and the process of being a leader, which I think are well worth restating. And we had a conversation, didn't we, about the we're not going to talk about the Cadbury family. I know that. We're not going to talk about the Mars family that you worked with. But those two organizations are really interesting. And I shared with you, I grew up in Birmingham, and I know the Bourneville area, which is this village that the Cadbury family created to support in the early industrial era, to support.
Yeah, it's well, it was before I joined Mars, as you know.
Yes, that's right. And Mars family have done similar things historically and currently. I think I'm still trying to remember that word that we're supposed to use, describing industrialists that do good sort of for their workers. I forget.
Philanthropists.
Philanthropy, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so there's a philanthropic element to these companies, both of them, but certainly Mars, who you worked for, they have that as well, which seems to be coming across in terms of thinking about somebody like yourself, who became one of their very senior people. Tell me about sort of those ideas that you have around sort of authenticity and ethical practice, and what that means to you as a sort of leader.
I think the best way I put it is really early on. I guess, I mean, I've said to you before, I had an uncle who ran a smaller business. Yeah. And he actually, number one, he gave me one piece of advice, which is, well, if you work for somebody else, you'll never get very wealthy. Yeah. Which is certainly true. Yeah. Because you're also not taking the risks that the people who start those businesses do. But the other thing which came across really clearly to me, and I always think, first of all, is how would I expect to be treated? How would I want to be treated? Yeah. And I'm not, I mean, I surround myself by smart people. That's how I get on. You know, I'm not the most intellectually brilliant person in the world. Absolutely not. But I have employed a lot of them.
I'm sure you're really smart, so I'm not going to take the obvious joke, because I know you enjoy it when you get teased. But surrounding yourself by people who know what they're doing is one of the cleverest things a manager can do. And I think it relates to that thing you say about putting your ego to one side, recognizing that people are cleverer than me. And I recognize that in my own clinicians. I mean, I bring new patients in, I talk to them, and they say, "Oh, are you going to be my therapist?" And I say, "Well, actually not. I don't do much of that. I'm not that good at it these days. I've got some people who are really good at it because they continued that work and they're really, really skilled. And I don't have an ego problem with that. It's like, it's great, I think. And that, I think, is core.
It comes across in everything you do, though. And you know, that term authenticity is really overused in so many ways, because people use it badly. They use it as a catch-all for everything they think they should do. Yeah. And all it is, you know, really being a human. Yeah. Just be a human being, you know, just recognize that people have off days. Yeah. Recognize that people have problems. Be sympathetic to it. And the most important thing any leader has is empathy. If you are empathetic, and you really truly are empathetic, I think that's when people come to you and they buy into what you're trying to sell. Because let's be frank, leaders in business, you're selling a vision. You're actually saying, this is where we want to be. This is where we want to get to. Yeah. I don't know all the answers to get there. You know, you have to be comfortable with that fact that you start off on the journey and you don't know exactly how you're going to get there. Yeah. You know, you don't have to know everything. And that's the other important thing. Recognize the fact you don't know everything.
So tell me for you, your experience of authenticity, what is that? And where do you think you got it from? Because what's interesting talking to you is I'm not talking to somebody who's been on the course. Do you know what I mean?
Not
somebody who's got that training. You are somebody who is offering that experience and very much has that experience. But you began to talk about like your uncle. What were the other, do you think, seminal influences in terms of creating this sense of who you are as a person, do you think?
Well, I mean,
I told you I was going to ask you a person.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I never had a dad, except that I ended up with two.
Right.
My mum got pregnant in 1958. Yeah. Never knew my dad, and she came from a family of 13 kids, and she was the only girl.
Yeah.
And I was basically brought up. I mean, she was in and out of my life in the early part of it. Yeah. And I was brought up by my uncle and aunt and her at times, and another uncle who lived with us, and cousins and things like that. So, we were all piled into a 3-bedroom semi in Wembley. None of them had been to university before, but they basically worked hard. I mean, they consider themselves in the old terms as to be working class. Yeah. Now, that kind of thing I kind of poo-poo now, if the truth be known. People argue with me about it, but that's just the way I am. But what started me off, I guess, was I just wanted to be recognised and treated properly. And I was very fortunate. I was really good at school. I was one of the kids who they kind of 11 years old were going, there's an Oxbridge kid. But I kind of know I didn't want that. It was like, I don't fit in the kids I know at the time in the early 60s that were going to Oxbridge. We didn't have the money to do it. And quite frankly, I'd have felt out of place. Yeah. And I think every kid likes to fit in. Yeah. And so it's quite important to fit in. I got pretty good at playing cricket, and I ended up kind of 14, 15 as a captain of adult cricket clubs. And that's really quite entertaining, and it's quite challenging when you're 15 and you're telling a guy who is 35 years old that you're going to change him as a bowler because he's actually having a really rubbish game, and he really needs to go and shake his head a bit, for want of a better word. But you have to learn to do that in a way that means that he'll come back next time.
Yes.
And I was in that respect, I think sport did a really good thing for me, because I had some great coaches, because they didn't just teach you the technicalities of playing cricket. They taught you how to manage people.
Yeah.
And they taught you what happened in the field, and they taught you about stress, and they taught you about having to make decisions. So I'm a big fan of people playing team sports, I must admit. But and it doesn't matter whether you're very good at it or very average at it.
Yeah. But thinking about your sort of early beginnings, I guess we could describe them as humble. You weren't born.
I didn't want for anything, so I wouldn't say I was humble, but
Okay, but I'm guessing that time with that experience of being a single parent, but then part of a larger sort of working class sort of clan, as it were. You would have felt okay and normal because they would have just loved you and looked after you and all that sort of stuff. But you certainly didn't fit the 1950s description, and many working class people didn't, to be honest. But this idea of a nuclear family with mum and dad and all that sort of stuff, and you weren't in that. But do you think that had an influence later on in life in terms of your capacity to empathise with people? I guess that's the simple question here.
I think that's true. I mean, I could equally as well laugh and joke and work with the guys who worked on the lines in the factories that I worked with when I was basically leading departments, and I saw other people struggling to do that. And it isn't, I had one guy who, a fellow manager, and not within Mars, but a different company, who turned around to me and says, I can't get myself down to their level. Yeah. And I thought, that's exactly why they really will do nothing for you, because you think you're better than them.
Yeah.
And, even if you think it, you don't say it.
Yeah. And also, one think better than anybody else. I mean, people are different.
Exactly.
You know, and have different skills, and some have a small set of skills and some have a very small set of skills, but so what? It's sort of relevant. Henry Ford, I think, really well in terms of when he was producing production lines and all that sort of stuff. He sort of never really imagined that people should fit a certain level. No. But I'm interested in sort of how this formed in you, and I guess there's something about you and those early experiences where you came to be comfortable with your experience, even though it didn't fit in, and making an early decision that, okay, I'm clever enough to do the Oxbridge route, but it's not right for me. There's a level of emotional maturity and psychological maturity there, which is interesting.
I actually think that comes a lot from the fact that a lot of my friends were older than me.
Right.
And I didn't have any younger children around me. I mean, at school, obviously, I was in the same age group, but, you know, I'm an only child in that respect. My cousins were much older than me, and then I was surrounded by adults. And so I think that kind of makes you behave more like an adult because you see that behaviour around you.
Sure. But it's also interesting, isn't it, that for me, it's interesting anyway, sort of just having a conversation with you about that. You make a decision that's correct for you. Quite clearly it was correct for you. And that has something that you've continued throughout your life, that rather than, you know, like I could go to Oxford and get this big qualification and be seen as important. That's a sort of ego thing, isn't it? But you chose not to do that. You chose to go with, again, this idea of what is authentically correct for yourself. Would that be reasonable?
That was the thing. I think that's the thing as well, is being given the freedom to choose.
Right.
As well. Yeah, I wasn't in the situation where something was expected of me.
Oh yes,
I was expected to be a decent human being. I was expected to do the right things. I was expected to be polite, and it was hoped that I would actually be successful.
Yeah.
And it wasn't something that was, you will do this, you will go down that route. I was really given the freedom to do whatever I liked.
Sounds like what I would call a facilitating environment.
Yeah, I think that's a very good way. You know, basically, I was given, I guess in some ways, I was given the tools to do what I wanted to do.
Yeah. To become who you could become.
Then, you know.
Yeah. And follow your... And that seems to have been a theme in terms of when you went to Mars, for example, that, again, clearly your managers recognise this and recognise you were the sort of person that needed to be given their space and had skills, and they would grow and develop organically and naturally, as well as, you know, I'm sure you had sort of things that you had to do because it was part of your job and all that sort of stuff. But in terms of growth and development, you were placed again in a facilitating environment, it seems to me.
Yeah, and that's the trick, is, you know, and I think the thing when I talk about the authenticity of it is teaching you enough that you recognise of what's happening to you as well as what you can control.
Yeah.
And I always say to people, like, you know, worry about the things you can change. If you can't change it, stop worrying about it.
Yes.
Because you're just consuming energy that you could use to do something far better.
And you're going to make yourself mentally ill. I mean, literally.
Really, authentic to me means about being consistent and actually telling people what you really think.
Yeah.
And doing it in the right way, delivering the message. I mean, you see some people who do this from a position almost of, I know this is going to hurt you, and in some ways I'm going to get a little bit of fun out of doing this to you.
Yeah. There are savers. Thankfully, there's small number. There's also, I think, there's a larger block of people, and I don't know if this is your experience, there's a larger block of people who are just very afraid of giving people bad news and then
absolutely
they're afraid, as opposed to, I guess, which is your approach, where you would assume that somebody's going to be able to cope with this stuff, that they have the skills and resources, you can help them, but you have an intrinsic belief in the capacity of other people to manage their life. I get
yes,
that.
I do. Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
But equally well, I'm sympathetic to people who are struggling to do just that.
Of course. All of us at times. I struggle at times with being able to.
We all do.
For God's sake, I mean, that's a normal state of being a human being, isn't it?
Yeah. And that's what I mean about being a human, is recognizing it. And that's why empathy, I think, is so important.
But there's a difference,
having that emotional intelligence.
That people have vulnerabilities and challenges, and at times performance drops off, and there's a difference between that and sort of inherently investing in somebody being infantile or infantilizing people. I mean, I think my experience is, if you genuinely believe that somebody can sort of get on with it, if you invest in them as a capable human being, that's what you'll get from people. And then you look at when they're struggling and they need help. I mean, that makes sense. That's my belief. Right.
You're absolutely right. I share that belief with you entirely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's there was a fabulous guy who worked for me at Mars.
Yeah.
Probably the best ocean buyer I've ever known. Unfortunately, he was killed in the USA in a car crash, and it broke my heart when I lost him,
of course,
because he was such a close friend of mine as well. But he had a fabulous phrase. I mean, we would sit there and talk about the strategy for how we were going to buy, and he would agree it, and he'd say, so that's where we're going, and this is what we want to create. And I knew I could just say, Philip, absolutely right. And he described himself perfectly. He said, Garry, I'm like water. I'll find my way there.
Yes. Yeah. I get that. I'm a brummie. Water is in my bones with all the canals, things like that.
Indeed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Finish of the Midlands.
Well, I am really intrigued by the metaphors and images that people use to try and explain themselves and their experience of things, because I think there is, when we are operating at that level of creativity, we're operating at our optimum level. And I see it, and particularly sort of senior leadership, the trying to get senior leaders to understand that it is about this metaphoric experience. It's about this creative experience. It's not about trying to dumb yourself down into hard outcomes all the time, because that's only using one aspect of our mental capacity, really. You have this idea of simplifying to succeed. Now, it's not, it could just be a statement, but I'm guessing for you, that is something that you've come to understand through a long process. And I'm intrigued as to what you mean by that. I understand what some people might mean in Instagram, and sort of they would annoy me. But what do you mean, Garry, by this?
Well, without using the word simplify too much, I really sometimes despair that people create complexity. They create the problem for themselves very often. I mean, I'm a great one. When people are struggling with a dilemma or a problem, I break it down into its component parts. Yeah. And I actually start doing some constraints with them. Hang on, if you did this, what would happen? Yeah. If this happened, why have we got to here? And very often you find that people have put layers and layers and layers of process and constraints and problems on themselves. And I would sit there, and I mean, very often I'll turn and say, but what are we really trying to do here? Yeah. Isn't it actually just kind of, all you really want to do is buy 2,000 tons of cheese in the most effective way at the lowest price that gives you the quality that's needed. Now, if you think about just those parameters, first of all, life will get a lot easier. Let's solve the simple problem, because the rest of it you'll find will go away, because you've created the rest of it. You've put the, for want of a better word, the corporate bullshit on a lot of the rest of it.
Yeah.
Get rid of that and think about what you're really trying to do, what you're trying to achieve here, and just achieve it.
What do you think in terms
the rest disappears?
In terms of what is blocking, leaders from understanding that? I get it, but what do you think is blocking them from understanding that?
You see, that's where you come back to the thing I was talking about at the event, that mask that people put on. This is the way I think people think I should behave.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's the problem. people come in there and they think I have to fit a certain role, I have to fit a certain shape, I have to fit a certain persona, yeah, and that's their mask, and they shove it on all the time and they wear them, and then they're actually probably not wise enough or experienced enough to understand that actually the really good leaders aren't wearing a mask. That's how they are.
Yeah.
This is what they are. So instead of wearing a mask, make yourself look like them. Yeah. But not by putting a mask on, but by learning from them. And that, I think, is where the problems really occur.
Yeah.
Is that we produce clones a lot of the time who think that this is the way they're expected to act and expected to behave.
Yeah.
And we've got to get rid of that.
I mean, I think from my perspective, because for me, what you're talking about is this unhealthy psychological process called compartmentalization, where people create or unhealthy role boundaries. And I come from a creative arts background, particularly acting. So masks and roles and lack of authenticity is something I'm very intrigued by in terms of how we can sort of get people to understand that. Because obviously we all play different roles in different aspects of our lives, but it is me that's playing them, hopefully. And these roles all authentically flow from a sense of the core of me, and if they don't, I'm actually causing myself damage and probably causing other people damage.
Yep, absolutely right. I mean, sorry, carry
on, Gary.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, people say to me, how is it you're so supremely confident? Yeah, because people see that in me. I'm incredibly confident, and I have.
You're not an arsehole with it. I mean, that's the nice thing about it. You're not.
Well, I try not to be.
Well, you're not. You're just not an arsehole. I mean, that's it. That's the truth of you, Gary, is that you're a decent person, and you've maintained being a decent person through these various places that you've existed in. I mean, you are a supremely decent person, and that's how you come across, and you've held on to that all the way through your career.
It does come back to the fact that you know, right at the start, I said, how would I want to be treated?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the only time I'll use that analogy of how would I want something, because that actually then maps on of how I think other people would like to be treated.
Yeah.
And sometimes you'll be wrong, because eventually I find out what do they want in their circumstances, not what I want them to have. But yeah, I mean, people ask me why I get the confidence, and I really don't know. I mean, some of it's been that things I've done in the past have been successful, and that obviously does give you confidence. You know, you've got to where you are and you've been able to achieve things. And it's an old hackneyed phrase, I suppose, but it is quite true. I mean, I really didn't achieve it by myself. Everything I did was with a team.
And there's something I say to people to try and understand or explain our social nature. This is, it's a smartphone, isn't it? And you understand technology and all that sort of stuff, but that's not why we have this. Technology is a byproduct. A smartphone is a byproduct of the fact that we can organize into complex social groups, and that's a fact. That's where it comes down to. And it seems to me that, in the conversation that we're having, you have a deep understanding that it's about people and people relationships. And if you can inhabit a space which is comfortable within yourself and allow other people to do that, then you get the best out of people.
I think that's very true. I mean, I do. People say about me that I'm good at predicting how other people will react and behave. I'm good at predicting their behavior in the future, because I do put myself into their position. And I don't mean what would I do in their circumstances? I really do think, what will they do in their circumstances? What are the things I'm doing to them that will make them act in a different way? What are the things that are actually happening around them that makes them act in a different way? And truthfully, the other thing I think a lot of, the people who are afraid to have those authentic conversations are the people who I think often are desperate to be liked.
Yes.
And truthfully, I can be in the situation that I don't do anything to make you dislike me, but I can't make you like me.
Yes.
And I recognise that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I can live with the fact that not everybody likes me.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean to say they're my worst enemy. It doesn't mean to say I won't have a beer with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't mean to say I won't do the right thing by them. You don't have
But
to like them.
there's a difference between somebody who has authentic, or what I would also call good self-esteem, a good sense of self, who it can tolerate discord and can tolerate dislike and can allow people to have their own views, and have their own mind. I mean, some people are I think, in a very painful position of trying to control the thoughts other people have about them all the time.
That's got to be a nightmare.
It's such a painful place to be in, but actually allowing that difference, allowing people to be themselves, and then being able to set the guiding principles of the group and the organisation is, I think, key to success, really. But not assuming that everybody then has to be a sort of carbon copy of your own thinking and your own process.
That's right, and I do think what it does, as you rightly said earlier on, is it thins out the organisation so that the adults survive,
yes,
and the people who can have adult-to-adult conversations survive, and those who want to be childlike, or want to be the child, or don't want to be the adult, actually vote with their feet. They leave in the end.
I agree with you. And that's my experience. It's absolutely is my experience. And the other thing that we haven't touched upon is the sort of ethics of it, because I think it's interesting. I wrote a press release this week talking about this concept of toxic masculinity, and the idea of that there's been threats to male identity for some time, and clearly it's not something that threatens you. You've just grown with your time, so you're comfortable within your own skin, and that's more than possible. But there is a lot of that going around, and particularly in organisations, of this bullying and toxicity and scapegoating, and it's not something you would engage with, and I'm sure you would shut down relatively quickly if it happened.
If it was happening in an organisation that I was seeing, I would actually address it in exactly that way, and I'd tell people why their behaviour is unacceptable.
Absolutely, and then they'd be gone pretty quickly if they couldn't get the message.
They'd either modify their ways or they'd be gone. That's very true.
Absolutely. But it's interesting to see it happening. It's happening in Parliament. It's happening in Ukraine. There's sort of very toxic desire to control and destroy. If you're not me, I'm going to destroy you. I can't deal with the other. And it's really, for me, a real pleasure to be talking to you, because you're very comfortable with who you are as a human being. And I imagine that has meant that over the years that people have worked with you have learned to be comfortable with themselves.
Very true.
Yeah. Because you model.
The big thing for me when we sold the second business, quite frankly, was the fact that guys and girls could go and do whatever they liked, and then actually had an experience that was pleasurable, and they learnt. And I do see people, modeling
and they were
themselves
successful as well, not just in terms of their own sense of creativity, but they were successful financially. And I think that is really important in these times to discuss that financial success can go hand in hand with psychological success, relational success, and actually I think they are all part of the same package, to be honest.
I agree. I love it when guys and girls who I work with have gone off to do bigger jobs than I've ever done, and we're still in contact, and they turn around to me and they say, something, best boss I ever had, best leader I ever had, and that's such a reward. That is the thing that makes me really warm and fuzzy inside.
Because there's also, I too come from what would have been called a working class background, and actually we were quite humble, and I can sort of attest to the fact that poverty isn't fun. It just isn't.
No, in another conversation, my wife comes from a background that was really poverty stricken. I have to tell her to spend money still. It's that kind of conversation we have.
Absolutely. I'm still learning how to do it. My boys asking me a lot about how to do it, to be honest. Sort of,
Yeah, that'll help.
Thankfully, he doesn't come from that background, so he doesn't have the same sort of hang-ups that I do around spending my money. He's quite happy to spend it for me.
She's got her own as well, but she's still you still find her kind of cobbling together pieces of furniture that will work for her, and I say we can buy it. You know?
Yeah. And I think it's well worth stating that it is possible to be successful on all these levels and maintain your integrity as a human being.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing I'm very excited about having met you, because sort of I can often talk about these things and people might think, well, that's not the truth, is it? But actually, my experience is that the genuinely successful people like yourself are basically decent human beings, and they maintain that decency of their experience of being a human being, and that is what they've had to offer.
I agree with you 100%. I mean, the people I know who have been really successful are humans.
Yes.
They've done the right thing. They've made the right decisions. Yeah. They've been ethical in terms of their dealings with people.
Yeah.
And they don't, and I do think it comes down to, again, it isn't about your ego, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Stop it.
Yeah.
The rewards come from forgetting that.
The thing I wrote I might send you the press release because I like it. I don't think it's going to be picked up.
To see it.
Yeah, but the thing I wrote in the press release about this toxic aspect of functioning is that the Trumps, the Putins of the world are rare. They get all the attention and they get to the top of their particular field. But actually, most of those people who are toxic fall by the wayside and end up lost, not very successful, because they're antisocial. And it's the pro-social people that become successful. It's the pro-social aspects of life that mean we have things like this. And I think you're a good example of that in terms of a very successful on every level human being. And
well, thank you for that. But it's nice of you to say. But yeah, I think I've done that. And I've still got years to improve on it. And that's the other thing. You never stop learning. You never stop developing this part of your life. Yeah. I learn something new every day. I see somebody behaving in a certain way and I think, oh God, she dealt with that really well. I'm so impressed with that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think it is actually time to finish the show. It's been an hour and we stop. As I said to you in our conversation on the phone, everybody goes, I can't fill an hour. And then we skip on by and it's done. I want to sort of end on this idea about your notion of simplifying to succeed, which I totally agree with. But it seems to me that you have simply found out who you are as a person, and you've done it in a very self-conscious way. By that, I don't mean like vain, but you've just been yourself and been authentic in yourself, and that has worked.
Yes, it has. And I think if you combine that with an inquisitive mind and logical thought, then you really can simplify it, and you do succeed as a result of it.
Yeah,
that's why I use the phrase. That's why the book was written. It was so that people would actually realise that those two things together are going to work for you.
Yeah. Look, Garry, it's been a real pleasure to have you on. I'm going to bring you back at some point in the future if you're sort of amenable to that, because
I'd love to.
I mean, I think having these messages going out, particularly during our troubled times, are massively important. And coming from somebody with your professional history, it has weight and authority, and I think that's really important as well. Stay there because I need to end the show. Don't you go anywhere. I'm going to say goodbye to everybody. I'm really excited to be back, even though I've got a cold and I've been sneezing and snuffling and stuff like that. But I thoroughly deserve having a cold, having been away for 2 weeks. So I deserve that punishment for having had fun. But I don't care. I had a really nice time in Rio. So Yabu sucks. And see you all again next week. It's been lovely to have you on, Garry. You stay there. Goodbye for now. And see you all back live and direct from Hackney next week. Bye-bye.